Hey you, thanks for stopping by. The day's done, so let's settle in and make ourselves comfortable. I brought a few stories to share. The mug that stayed warm a little too long. A ceramic mug sat on a small table near a curtained window. The tea inside had been steeped, maybe, but no one took a sip. It wasn't steaming anymore, but it hadn't gone cold either. The handle was turned slightly away, like someone meant to come back to it. The light moved across the table and touched the rim for a while, before drifting away again. It sat there all afternoon, holding on to a little warmth, long after it should have let go. The field that had forgotten the fence. There was a field at the edge of a neighborhood that had once had a fence around it, but the posts had fallen quietly, one by one. A few leaned into tall grass, others disappeared completely. The boundary was still visible if you knew where to look, but only in the way the grass changed color slightly along the line. No one rebuilt it, no one missed it. The field stayed where it was, so did the space the fence used to hold. The batch of flowers that never got watered. In a small yard behind a house, a cluster of flowers bloomed where nothing had been planted. They weren't watered, they weren't trimmed. The soil was dry, but not cracked. They didn't look vibrant or wild, just alive in a quiet way. When it rained, they barely moved. When it was hot, they didn't wilt. No one picked them. No one pulled them. They simply existed in a place that didn't ask anything of them. The screen door that was never closed all the way. There was a screen door in a house near the coast that never clicked shut. It stayed open by a finger's width, just enough to let in a sliver of breeze and a bit of salt air. Sometimes it creaked when the wind nudged it, but not enough to make a sound worth fixing. It didn't swing, it didn't slam, it just hovered in its space, half in, half out. The house didn't seem to mind. The wall that held nothing back. At the edge of a meadow, an old rock wall wound its way between trees. It didn't block anything. The stones were uneven, some stacked with care, others barely balanced. Moss had settled into the cracks. One stone had slipped down years ago and never moved again. It left a small gap that no animal used and no wind passed through. The wall didn't end, it just stopped somewhere, like it had been built until someone got tired. It wasn't a barrier, it was just there. The barn that never echoed. Out behind a long-forgotten field, there was a barn that still stood. The doors had warped slightly, and one of them leaned forward just a little too far to close again. Inside, the dust didn't float, it just hung there. Light came through one crack in the wall, wide enough to notice, but too thin to brighten anything. There were no animals, no tools, just the hollow scent of old wood and dry rope. It wasn't sacred, it was just there, left over. The stream that refused to rush. There was a narrow stream that moved through the woods like it was remembering how. It didn't gurgle or babble, it barely rippled. The stones beneath it were round and smooth and always damp. Nothing sharp, nothing sudden. Leaves sometimes floated across its surface, but never sank. They just turned slowly and eventually drifted out of sight. The stream didn't lead anywhere in particular, and it didn't seem to mind. The hallway that didn't miss the students. In an old building, a hallway stayed warm all through the summer. The floors held a faint scuff of sneakers and boots and pencils that rolled too far. Lockers stood quiet, closed but not locked. The smell of paper and chalk lingered like a whisper that didn't need to be spoken. A clock on the wall blinked once but didn't tick. Nothing echoed, nothing waited. It was just the space between school years, doing nothing in particular. The porch that held the season just a little longer. There was a porch at the back of a house where the seasons seemed to take their time leaving. Even after the summer had technically ended, the warmth stayed in the floorboards a little too long. Leaves gathered in the corner, not in piles, just a thin scatter, like something had once swept through and forgot to finish. The wind was gentle there, the kind that didn't ask for a sweater or fan, just quiet air, shifting a little. It wasn't autumn yet, but it wasn't anything else either. The tree that was ready too early. There was a tree at the edge of a yard that started shedding leaves before the air had turned. Just a few at first, gold, then rust, settling at the base like it knew something the others didn't. The branches didn't creak, they didn't lift or droop, they just adjusted. The grass below stayed green, and the wind hadn't changed yet, but the tree let it go anyway, not with urgency, just because. The pea that fell in the gap. Behind the narrow space between the counter and the oven, a single dried pea had come to rest. It wasn't visible unless you crouched down at an angle and looked with intent. It didn't roll, it didn't soften, it didn't rot, just stayed dry and round, caught in the space where brooms didn't reach and no one checked twice. It once had been a part of something, but now it was only itself, and that was fine. The rain that changed its mind. It started with a few drops, spaced out, hesitant. They darkened the pavement in small patches that never connected. The sky didn't fully commit. A breeze swept by, and the clouds shuffled a little, but nothing followed. A few more drops came, then none. The wet spots dried unevenly. The air stayed damp, but didn't cool. It had almost rained. That was all. The slippers that knew the floor. There was a pair of slippers under a bench near the door. The insides were worn, slightly flattened. One leaned in more than the other, as if they'd always been a little off. The fabric had worn thin at the heel, but hadn't split yet. They didn't smell, they didn't ask for attention, they just knew where they belonged, and that was the floor. The frame that didn't hold tight anymore. A painting hung in a hallway where no one paused to look. The image inside had faded in the sunlight over the years, and the bottom edge of the frame had loosened to just enough to tilt. The canvas hadn't warped, the wall was still strong. It just sat there, slightly uneven, softening into the space, like it was finally relaxing. It didn't ask to be straightened. It didn't care if it was seen. The doorknob that always turned too far. On a closet door that was never quite flush, the knob turned with a sound that wasn't a squeak or a click. It rotated a little too far, and always had, like it had been installed that way and forgotten. The latch still worked, the door still opened, but there was a second of slack before it caught. No one fixed it, no one mentioned it, it never locked, and nothing inside ever left. The vase that had a crack but held fine. On a shelf in the kitchen, a ceramic vase leaned ever so slightly to one side. A crack ran along its neck, thin as a pencil mark, long since sealed but never hidden. It held nothing, no flowers, no water, just its shape and a quiet place on the shelf. The light sometimes caught the crack, turning it into a highlight instead of a flaw. It wasn't broken, just visible. The soap that no longer had a shape. In a dish by the bathroom sink, the bar of soap had worn down to something no longer square, no longer round. It had a soft dent in the middle, where fingers always met it. It didn't slip anymore, it didn't lather much. It just sat there, holding the memory of being useful. No one replaced it, not yet. It still worked, mostly. And that's all I have for tonight. The stories have come to an end, so I'll be on my way. Sleep well, and maybe we'll meet again tomorrow.